When I woke up on my 65th birthday, I couldn't get out of bed. Not because of some grand celebration the night before, though that would make for a better story, but because my back had simply decided it was done cooperating. After decades of taking my mobility for granted, my body was staging a rebellion. That morning was my first real confrontation with what aging might actually mean for my daily life. I'm Albert Siu, and if you're watching this video, you might be facing your own version of that morning. Maybe you've noticed stairs becoming more challenging, or neighborhood walks getting shorter. Perhaps you've caught yourself avoiding physical activities you once enjoyed without even realizing it. I know the fears that creep in. That voice whispering this is just the beginning of an inevitable decline. That maybe staying active is for the rare exceptions. Those genetic lottery winners or former athletes, not for ordinary people like us. But what I discovered over the past decade completely transformed my understanding of aging and activity. Today, I'm going to share 7 surprising truths that changed everything for me. Approaches that went against conventional wisdom, but helped me regain strength, mobility, and joy in movement that I thought was lost forever. This isn't just about maintaining independence, though that's certainly important. It's about something more fundamental, continuing to experience life fully, to engage with the world around you physically, and to maintain the capability to do the things that bring you meaning. Stay with me until the end, because the final approach I'll share was the most unexpected and the most powerful, the one that ultimately made all the difference when nothing else seemed to work. Plus, I'll give you my simple daily routine that requires no special equipment and has kept me stronger at 73 than I was at 67. The first thing I discovered flies in the face of the most common advice we hear: just walk more. When my mobility started declining, everyone had the same suggestion. My doctor said I needed to aim for 10,000 steps. My well-meaning daughter gifted me a fitness tracker that would buzz angrily if I didn't move enough each hour. My neighbor Harold boasted about his daily 3-mile constitutional that kept him fit as a fiddle. I tried. I really did. I'd force myself to shuffle around the block, counting steps and feeling increasingly discouraged as my back pain worsened and my knees protested. Each walk left me exhausted and sore, sometimes for days afterward. I began to believe that maybe I just wasn't cut out for this active aging business. Then came my unexpected revelation at a community center workshop on aging and movement. The physical therapist leading the session said something that stopped me in my tracks. Walking more isn't the answer for everyone. What matters is moving differently. She explained that many of us fall into limited movement patterns as we age. We use the same muscles in the same ways, while others weaken from disuse. The key wasn't adding more steps, it was introducing variety in how I moved. I remember sitting in that cold plastic chair feeling a wave of emotion, part relief, part hope, part frustration that I'd spent months pushing myself to do something that was actually making things worse. My friend Diane had a similar experience. After her hip replacement, she kept trying to return to her daily mall walks because that's what she thought she should do. It wasn't until she switched to a gentle movement class that incorporated different planes of motion that she began to see real improvement. Have you found yourself focusing on just one type of movement, like walking, while neglecting all the other ways your body is designed to move? Think about how children move. They reach, twist, squat, lift, and balance without even thinking about it. When was the last time you moved that freely? This brings me to my second discovery, which completely changed how I approached my daily activities. I always thought strength training was for bodybuilders and athletes, certainly not for a retired school principal in his 60s who had never set foot in a weight room. Cardio was for health, I believed, and lifting weights was for people who cared about appearance. How wrong I was. You don't need to lift weights, my doctor had told me during my annual checkup. Just keep walking regularly. But as my strength continued to decline despite my neighborhood strolls, I became increasingly frustrated. My turning point came during a visit with my 4-year-old granddaughter, Emma. We were playing in the park when she asked me to join her on the swings. I lowered myself onto the swing, but when it was time to get up, I couldn't. My legs simply lacked the strength to push me up from that low position. I had to call my daughter for help while Emma watched with confusion in her eyes. That night, after the embarrassment had faded, I made a decision. I called Martin, a friend who had mentioned taking a senior strength class at the YMCA. I'm not strong enough to play with my granddaughter, I told him, my voice breaking. I need to do something different. 2 days later, I stood nervously at the door of the community center watching seniors, many older than me, lifting small weights with focused determination. Victor, the 78-year-old instructor with impressive posture and a gentle demeanor, welcomed me in. Most people don't realize that we lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass each decade after 30 unless we actively work to maintain it, he explained, as he showed me how to hold the small dumbbells. But the wonderful thing is that it's never too late to build it back. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they did happen. After 6 weeks, I could get up from low chairs without using my hands. After 3 months, I could lift my suitcase into the overhead compartment when visiting my sister in Arizona. And 6 months later, I was chasing Emma around the code playground, both of us laughing as I scooped her up into a hug. What I discovered is that strength isn't just about muscles. It's about independence. It's about having the physical capability to live life on your own terms. Now I'm curious, have you been told that gentle walking is enough to maintain your strength and mobility as you age? Type strength in the comments if you've been surprised by how important resistance training becomes as we get older. And if you're finding value in these insights, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos about thriving in our later years. I appreciate you staying with me so far. Now let me share the third lesson that transformed my approach to staying active. When I first committed to rebuilding my strength and mobility, I had this idea that I needed to push myself to exhaustion for it to count. No pain, no gain. Isn't that what they say? I'd return from my twice-weekly strength class feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. My muscles would ache for days, making me dread the next session. I was convinced this suffering was necessary, that if I wasn't sore, I wasn't making progress. Then came the revelation that changed everything. I met Ruth. Ruth was 82, petite with silver hair always neatly pinned back, and moved with a grace that belied her age. After class one day, as I was grimacing while reaching for my water bottle, she sat beside me. "You're working too hard, dear," she said matter-of-factly. I was taken aback. Wasn't working hard the whole point? "I've been doing some form of strength training for 20 years, Ruth continued. Never missed more than a week, but I never push until it hurts either. Consistency is what's kept me going all this time." Ruth explained that she exercised almost daily, but gently. She never left a session feeling depleted. "I could always do more if I wanted to," she told me. "That's how I know I'm doing it right." I was skeptical but desperate. The soreness was making me consider quitting altogether. So I decided to try Ruth's approach. I reduced the weights, focused on proper form, and committed to daily movement that challenged me just enough without leaving me in pain. The unexpected result? I made more progress in the next 3 months than I had in the previous 6. More importantly, I began to look forward to my exercise time rather than dreading it. This principle of gentle consistency worked beautifully until it didn't, and that's the twist in this lesson. About a year into my new routine, I hit a plateau. My progress stalled despite my faithful daily practice. It was Ruth again who noticed and pulled me aside after class. "Sometimes," she said with a knowing smile, "we need to surprise our bodies. When was the last time you really challenged yourself?" That weekend, with Ruth's words echoing in my mind, I joined a community hiking group tackling a moderate trail I would have thought impossible for me just a year earlier. The hike was difficult. I had to push beyond my comfort zone, but I completed it, and the sense of accomplishment was indescribable. The lesson? Consistency is the foundation, but occasional intensity is the catalyst for continued growth. Finding that balance has been key to my ongoing progress. Have you found yourself either pushing too hard and burning out, or staying too comfortable and plateauing in your fitness journey? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between, in finding that sweet spot of sustainable challenge. And speaking of challenges, this brings me to my fourth discovery, which completely shifted how I think about maintaining mobility as we age. For years, I interpreted any pain during movement as a warning to stop immediately. I'd been told repeatedly, if it hurts, don't do it. This seemed like sound advice, until it led me to avoid more and more activities, gradually shrinking my world. My struggle with knee pain illustrates this perfectly. It started as a mild discomfort when climbing stairs. Following conventional wisdom, I began to avoid stairs whenever possible. When the pain appeared during my walks, I shortened them. When it bothered me while gardening, I gave up kneeling and stooping. By protecting myself from pain, I inadvertently weakened the supporting muscles around my knees, making the problem worse. My mobility decreased, and activities I once enjoyed became increasingly difficult. My breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Bernard, an 85-year-old former physical therapist I met at a community lecture on joint health. After listening to me describe my approach to managing pain, he shook his head. Pain is a complex signal, Bernard explained. It doesn't always mean damage is occurring. Sometimes it's just your body's alarm system being overly cautious. He drew a distinction that changed everything for me: the difference between hurt and harm. Some movements might hurt temporarily but actually help heal and strengthen in the long run. Other movements might feel fine in the moment but cause harm over time. Bernard suggested I work with a physical therapist to identify which movements were beneficial despite causing some discomfort and which truly needed to be avoided. Following his advice led to a revelation. Many of the movements I'd been avoiding were exactly what my knees needed to get stronger. Under professional guidance, I learned to distinguish between the sharp pain of potential injury and the stretching sensation of beneficial challenge. Thomas, my 70-year-old neighbor who had overcome severe back pain, had a similar realization. Once I understood that not all pain meant I was damaging myself, he told me, I stopped being so afraid of movement. That fear was actually keeping me trapped in pain. Learning to interpret pain as information, not simply a stop sign, transformed my relationship with my body. I became more attuned to different sensations and more confident in knowing when to push through and when to back off. I wonder, have you been avoiding certain movements because of discomfort, potentially creating a cycle of weakness and more pain? Type "move" in the comments if you've experienced this cautious approach to pain that might actually be limiting your mobility rather than protecting it. Your comments really do help this channel reach more people who might benefit from these insights, and I'm grateful for your engagement. Thank you for continuing to watch as we explore these lessons together. This understanding about pain leads perfectly into my fifth discovery, one that required me to confront one of my deepest fears about aging. Of all the concerns that come with aging, falling often tops the list, and for good reason. Falls can have serious consequences for older adults. But what I discovered about fall prevention surprised me. After my friend Eleanor broke her hip in a fall, I became increasingly anxious about my own balance. I began to walk more cautiously, taking smaller steps and keeping my eyes fixed on the ground. I installed handrails throughout my house and avoided uneven surfaces whenever possible. I thought I was being prudent, but in reality, I was setting myself up for exactly what I feared most. During a senior wellness assessment at my local hospital, the physical therapist observed my cautious gait and asked, "How often do you deliberately challenge your balance?" I stared at her blankly. Challenge my balance? Wasn't I supposed to be protecting it? Balance is a skill that needs practice, she explained gently. When we avoid all situations that challenge our balance, we actually become less stable over time. This conversation forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. My fear of falling was causing me to move in ways that were weakening my balance systems. By avoiding activities that felt slightly unstable, I was losing the very abilities I needed to prevent falls. With considerable anxiety, I enrolled in a balance training class. I still remember the first day, gripping the back of a chair while attempting to stand on one foot, my knees shaking. I felt ridiculous and afraid. "I can't do this," I told Lisa, the instructor. She looked at me with kind but determined eyes. "You can't yet," she corrected, "but you will." She was right. Gradually, I progressed from holding the chair with both hands to one hand to just a fingertip, and eventually to no support at all. Each small success built not just physical balance, but also confidence in my body's capabilities. One conversation during that class particularly moved me. Josephine, a quiet woman in her late 70s, shared how she had become virtually homebound due to fear of falling after a minor stumble. "I realized one day that I was no longer living," she said softly. "I was just existing within the walls of my house. That's when I decided that even if I did fall while trying to reclaim my life, it would be worth the risk." Her words struck a profound chord. I had been focusing so much on avoiding a fall that I hadn't considered the cost of that avoidance, a diminished life. This insight touches on something universal, how fear itself often restricts us more than our actual limitations. Whether it's fear of falling, fear of failure, or fear of judgment, we all face the choice between safe containment and risky growth. For me, deliberately practicing balance and challenging my stability in safe environments has not only improved my physical capabilities, but has also restored a sense of confidence and freedom in how I move through the world. As we approach our final and most important lesson, I want to acknowledge that this journey hasn't been linear or easy. There have been setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when I felt every one of my 73 years. But that brings me to perhaps the most powerful realization of all. Of all the lessons I've shared today, this is the one that truly changed everything for me. It's also the one I resisted the longest. When my activity levels first began declining, I approached the problem like a solitary project. I bought exercise DVDs to follow at home. I researched routines online. I dutifully walked alone around my neighborhood, nodding politely, but rarely stopping to chat with neighbors. My thinking was clear. Exercise was a personal responsibility, a checkmark on my daily to-do list. And if I couldn't motivate myself to do it, that was a failure of discipline or willpower. This approach worked somewhat for about 3 months. Then winter came. My motivation waned. The exercises became a burden rather than a source of energy. By spring, my good habits had unraveled completely. The turning point came through what seemed like a minor event at the time. My son called one evening, worried about a friend of his who was going through a difficult divorce. "He needs to get out more, Dad," he sighed. "I suggested he might join that community garden you've mentioned. Do you think you could take him if he's interested?" I agreed, though gardening had become difficult for me with my decreased mobility. When I met Sam the following week, I expected to simply introduce him to the garden coordinator before making my excuses and leaving. Instead, something unexpected happened. Sam knew nothing about gardening but was eager to learn. As I showed him how to prepare a small plot, I found myself kneeling in the dirt for the first time in months, demonstrating how to test soil quality and plant seedlings. "This must be so good for staying active," Sam commented, noticing how I moved from kneeling to standing throughout our session. Her observation startled me. I hadn't thought about the physical benefits. I'd been entirely focused on helping her, on sharing knowledge that brought me joy. That afternoon marked the beginning of a profound shift in my approach to staying active. Sam and I became regular gardening partners. Soon we were joined by others, some experienced gardeners, others complete novices. What had begun as a favor to my son blossomed into a community. The most remarkable thing? I began moving more and in more varied ways than any structured exercise program had achieved. I was bending, lifting, carrying, digging, and walking, often for hours at a time, without once thinking about it as exercise. I remember one evening, exhausted but deeply satisfied after a day in the garden, having a moment of clarity. What had changed wasn't my understanding of exercise or even my discipline. What had changed was my context. Movement had become integral to connection, to purpose, to being of service. Research confirms what I discovered by accident. Social connection is one of the strongest predictors of physical activity adherence in older adults. We are fundamentally social creatures. We thrive when our individual efforts are woven into something larger than ourselves. Have you found yourself struggling to maintain motivation when exercising alone? Type together in the comments if you've experienced how connection with others can transform physical activity from an obligation into a joy. Your engagement means so much, and I'm grateful for your presence throughout this exploration. If you found value in these insights, please subscribe to support this channel and ensure you don't miss future discussions on thriving as we age. Now, let me share some final thoughts on integrating these lessons into your life. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to acknowledge something important. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to staying active as we age. What worked for me might need adjustment for your unique circumstances, physical condition, and preferences. For instance, if you have significant mobility limitations or chronic conditions, you'll need to adapt these principles accordingly. Always consult healthcare providers before making substantial changes to your activity levels, especially if you have existing health concerns. Looking back at my journey from that discouraging morning when I couldn't get out of bed to where I am now, gardening, strength training, hiking, and playing actively with my grandchildren, I'm struck by how much my perspective has changed. I began with a narrow view of what staying active meant, primarily walking more, and discovered it encompasses so much more. Moving in varied ways, building strength, finding the right balance between consistency and challenge, reinterpreting pain, practicing balance, and perhaps most importantly, embedding physical activity within meaningful social connections. If you take just one thing from our conversation today, let it be this: your body is remarkably responsive to positive change, regardless of your age or how long you've been inactive. The capacity for improvement remains, waiting to be awakened through thoughtful, consistent attention. On a practical level, here's my suggestion for getting started. Choose just one of the lessons we've discussed that resonates most strongly with you. Focus on implementing that single approach for the next month before adding others. Small, sustainable changes create the foundation for lasting transformation. Remember that the goal isn't perfect adherence to an ideal routine. It's building a relationship with movement that enhances your life rather than feeling like an obligation. Movement that enables you to engage fully with the people and activities that bring you meaning. I'd love to hear about your experiences with staying active after 60. Which of these lessons resonated most with you? What approaches have you found helpful? Please share in the comments below to continue this valuable conversation. If you found this discussion useful, please consider sharing it with friends or family members who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe for more content on navigating the joys and challenges of our later years with grace and purpose. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, remember that movement is a celebration of what your body can do, not a punishment for what it can't.